Well, we're grateful tonight to have Mr. Michael McRay. Michael's a writer, a facilitator, story practitioner, and a new dad of a 13-week-old, right? 13
That's
weeks
right.
old?
Yeah, 3 months today.
A little boy named Rowan.
Rowan.
Yes, and so we're glad that he's upright and awake.
He better be asleep right now, actually. Go to bed.
Michael's most recent book is entitled I Am Not Your Enemy, which is a beautiful book that I highly recommend. A beautiful book about peacemaking and stories about people who come at peacemaking from out of many profound experiences of loss. And so we're grateful to have you with us,
Thanks
Michael.
so much, Lee.
Thank you. You talk in one of your chapters about a theory of peace building that takes as long to get out as one got in. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I learned about this theory when I was studying conflict resolution in grad school in Belfast, that it can take as long to get out of a conflict as it takes to get in it. And that there, in recovery circles, they often say if you go 20 miles in the woods, you have to go 20 miles back out. You don't take 20 years to learn a behavior and unlearn it in one.
And it strikes me as it's a good reminder about spousal arguments. Yeah. As long as you carry it on, it's going to take how long to get out of it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, keep it short. Yeah, and for me, when I heard it, I started thinking about the implications of that for race in the United States and what that might mean for us here. And that so often I hear people, particularly white people, saying things like, well, Obama was president twice. It's been 50 years since the Civil Rights Act. Can't we just stop talking about racism? Aren't we done with this? But if we even think about racism in terms of a conflict that started maybe in 1619 with the arrival of the first kidnapped Africans, and even if you just take it to 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, that's 345 years of conflict. So even if we're in a post-conflict stage, which we're not, but even if we were, we're a very small way into a very long journey.
Yeah. You, in your book, you talk a lot about people for whom theories of peacemaking are not mere theories, but these are very lived, poignant experiences.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my friend Padraig, actually, who you just heard from, has a line that says, some people's theories are other people's traumas. And I remember a woman I spoke to in Belfast told me a story about when she was a kid, and there was a storm outside, and she got scared and called for her mother, and her mother came in. And what her mother said to her was, "Don't worry, honey, it wasn't thunder, it was just a bomb." And that story told me about the ways in which violence is normalized for so many people, that when we grow up in areas of deep conflict, like here in the U.S., that the violence, the trauma of violence is not something that we often get away from. And it's a real complication for peace building, in the sense of how do we help people heal from trauma when there is no post-trauma for them, when it's this sense of persistence and pervasive trauma. But that's a key part of peace building, is finding a way so that we can heal from the harms and not continue to have to just cope with them.
Yeah. You say what's needed is a willingness to understand, at least as a primary part of peace building or peacemaking.
I've found in a lot of my study and travels and work in peace building that two things are really necessary if we're going to dismantle this notion of enemies, to be able to say, I'm not your enemy. One is proximity. We have to shorten the distance between us. And the second is humility. We have to be able to ask ourselves the question, has it ever occurred to us that we might have been wrong about what we believed about the other? And the hope then from that is that there's a curiosity that can stem, that can lead us to this desire, this willingness to be able to understand. Even if we're not to a place of understanding, we need to be willing to do that. So I think of one of the stories in the book is a woman named Jo Barry, who's an English woman. Her father was a member of the British Parliament, and he was killed in 1984 by an IRA bomber. This guy, Patrick McGee, was the bomber, and he spent years in prison for this. When he got out after the Good Friday Accords released people at the end of the Troubles, Jo and Pat had the opportunity to meet one another. She had spent 20 years cultivating this desire to understand his story, and it let her sit in the room with him. But what she got from him initially was just this perpetuation of political justification. Here's all the reasons why your father deserved to die. And she was really uninterested in that, obviously. But something changed for Patrick in the middle of that conversation. He suddenly turned to her and said, I don't know what to say anymore. What I really want, I think, is to hear your rage, to know what it is that you're feeling. And when he found within himself this willingness to be open to understanding her, the whole conversation shifted, and they knew that this wasn't going to be their last meeting. And to this day, 20 years later, they've spoken together over 200 times around the world. Wow. And they've become, Jo would say that Patrick is actually a dear friend at this point.
Wow, what a beautiful story. Thank you.
Absolutely.